Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking some highly charged commentary from Paul Cox. He's claiming that a 140-year-old organization is secretly pulling the strings of modern British politics, right from the shadows. Let's jump straight in and break down exactly what this source is arguing.
Cox kicks things off with this really mysterious idea right from the jump. He argues that honestly, we fundamentally misunderstand how the most profound political changes actually happen. You know, we're always looking for big, loud, historic events, right? But he suggests that the most impactful shifts happen without the public even noticing.
To ground this concept, think about two completely different types of change. On one side, you've got your traditional revolution, sudden, loud, usually a violent uprising. We're talking breaking points and massive protests. But on the flip side is what's known as the Fabian strategy. This is a slow, patient, and incredibly deliberate introduction of ideas over vast stretches of time. It's a strategy that doesn't fight the system, it enters it, and quietly rewires the whole thing from the inside out.
Okay, let's get into section 1. What exactly is the Fabian Society?
According to the source, we are looking at an unbroken line of influence stretching back 140 years. Founded in 1884 by wealthy intellectuals in North London, people Cox characterizes as the total opposite of the working class they claim to represent. As the Labour Party emerged in the early 20th century, Fabian influence supposedly grew right alongside it, pushing through the 90s with the Blair and Brown era. Fast forward to 2023, and a policy blueprint called Plans for Power was allegedly created to guide the incoming 2024 Labour government. The core argument: this is not ancient history. It's a continuous, deeply embedded operation. So the name itself is actually a huge clue. Early foundational thinkers like George Bernard Shaw and Beatrice and Sidney Webb deliberately named their group after Fabius Maximus. He was a Roman general famous for one specific tactic. He absolutely refused direct confrontation. Instead, he chose to delay, adapt, and wear his enemies down over time. It's all about winning a war of attrition, which Cox argues perfectly mirrors their political strategy today. Which brings us to Section 2, the strategy of permeation. This is the core engine of their strategy, something called permeation. It isn't about top-down, brute force control. It's about entering existing systems to normalize radical ideas and change institutions from within. The idea is that these concepts literally seep into the culture over time until they just overtake it and become the unquestioned norm. Basically, it breaks down into a deliberate, three-step, drip-fed approach. Step 1, they don't bother writing the laws themselves. They produce the ideas, the reports, the publications. Step 2, they use those publications to influence the people who do make the laws. And step 3, over years and decades, these once fringe ideas just become mainstream. Because think about it, once an idea is accepted as reality by the public, you don't even have to argue for it anymore. Let's move to Section 3, shaping British institutions. This is where the alleged footprint gets absolutely massive. Cox lists a huge array of structural pillars in British society, claiming the Fabians outright created the London School of Economics and the prominent magazine The New Statesman. He even claims that the roots of the NHS itself originated from early Fabian pamphlets. But beyond just creating things, the argument is that they heavily influence universities, allegedly making them hostile to non-left-wing views, and that they've molded the civil service into a homogenous group that resists outside political change, what some people today call the blob. And just to put a hard number on their modern active reach, 141. The commentary highlights that there are allegedly at least 141 members of parliament sitting in government right now who are documented members of the Fabian Society. But it supposedly goes even higher than that. This is a staggering claim. The argument that the highest levels of British leadership have always been steered by Fabian ideology. If every single Labour Prime Minister in history, all the way up to current Prime Minister Keir Starmer, is tied to this group, the premise is that you literally cannot look at modern government without looking at the Fabians. Now things get pretty intense in Section 4, controversies and historical claims. So, this is a deeply provocative visual, straight from the group's own history, their alleged early coat of arms. It is quite literally a wolf in sheep's clothing. For Cox, this is absolute proof of a deceptive, sinister intent. He argues this perfectly captures their entire philosophy, disguising their true aggressive intentions so they can infiltrate the pack and change society from within. Here's where we hit the darkest accusation in the commentary. Cox points out that foundational Fabian thinkers, specifically naming George Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb, were deeply tied to eugenics. He asserts they actively discussed forced sterilization, lethal chambers, and eliminating people they deemed unproductive to society. His argument is that while modern members might just brush this off as ancient history, this incredibly dark ideology is baked right into the core DNA of the organization. So Cox isn't pulling any punches here. He frames the group not as a benign political think tank, but uses explicit terms, calling it a deeply dark and sinister force. He wants to make it crystal clear that he views this organization as working in the shadows against what the public actually wants, relentlessly driving a left-wing socialist agenda that is almost impossible to dismantle because it's just so well disguised. Finally, let's look at Section 5, Modern Political Influence. Cox maps all of this directly onto what's happening right now. He claims Keir Starmer's government is currently executing that 2023 Fabian blueprint, Plans for Power, which he asserts is designed to stealthily push the UK closer to the EU and force multiculturalism to prop up failing economic models. Then, he points to the Green Party, claiming figures like Zach Polanski are radicalizing Fabian philosophy under the guise of environmentalism. And, lastly, labor unions. He argues that recent strikes aren't organic working-class movements at all. Instead, he claims they are engineered uprisings designed by this elite class to benefit those at the top, leaving everyday workers in the dust. He leaves his audience with this massive, sweeping warning. He asserts that everyday citizens are completely unknowing participants, just tiny cogs in a massive, elite, long-term project. The argument is that policies enacted today aren't actually for now. They are designed to fundamentally reshape Britain for the 2080s and beyond, entirely bypassing the consent of the voting public. And that brings us to the ultimate question this source raises. When change happens this slowly, you don't resist it. You simply live inside it. It forces us to ask, if power truly does arrive quietly, are we really aware of the organizations that are steering our future? It's a fascinating look at how political narratives and historical claims get woven together to explain what's happening today. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what's behind the curtain.